In the summer of 1998, my husband Danny and I drove out to the Missouri Ozarks for our second anniversary. A guy Danny worked with at the plant, a quiet fella named Russ, told him about a converted farmhouse out past Willow Fork that his wife's cousin used to rent out by the week. Cheap, Russ said, quiet. Good fishing pond out back. Russ wrote the number down on the back of a receipt, and Danny called it from the kitchen phone that night. The woman who answered was named Carol Ann Beecher. She sounded older, maybe 60, and she talked slow, the way people do out in the country when they're not in any hurry to get where the conversation's going. She said the place used to be her husband's family farm before he passed. Said she kept the main house up as a rental now, since she'd moved into town. $40 a night, cash, mail a deposit, and she'd leave the key under the mat. We packed the station wagon 2 weeks later. I brought my camera, one of those disposable ones you buy at the drugstore, because I wanted pictures of the pond for our photo album. Danny brought his camcorder, a big boxy Panasonic he'd gotten for Christmas the year before. The farmhouse sat about a quarter mile off the county road, at the end of a gravel drive lined with fence posts that didn't have any fence left on them anymore. It was a 2-story white house with a wraparound porch, and behind it stood an old barn that was clearly not used for animals anymore. And a smaller building I later learned was called a smokehouse, though nobody smoked meat in it these days. The key was under the mat, just like Carol Ann said. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and old dust. There was a paper guest book on the entry table, the kind with a ribbon marker, and I flipped through it while Danny hauled in the bags. Most of the entries were what you'd expect. Had a wonderful time. Pond was great. Thanks, Carol Ann. But one entry from a couple back in 1996 just said, ask her about the loft door. Don't let it go. Nothing else. No names. I figured it was somebody's inside joke and didn't think much of it. The bedroom was upstairs at the back of the house with a slanted ceiling because the roof came down low on that side. There was a strip of decorative wood trim running along the ceiling where it met the wall, old crown molding painted white, and it ran the whole length of the room except for one spot above the headboard where it looked like somebody had patched in a shorter piece that didn't quite match the color. I didn't notice that the first night. I was tired from the drive. What I did notice, around 2 in the morning, was a draft. A thin, cold line of air moving across my face, like someone had cracked a window. Except both windows were shut and locked. I got up and checked anyway. Nothing. I figured old houses breathe funny and went back to sleep. The next morning, Danny found 4 grooves in the wood floor at the foot of the bed, the kind furniture legs leave when something heavy sits in the same spot for years. Our bed wasn't sitting in those grooves. It was pushed about a foot to the left of them. I remember thinking that was odd, but I figured Carol Ann's cleaning lady must have moved it to vacuum and never pushed it back exactly right. We spent that day fishing at the pond, and it was a good day. I took 6 pictures with my disposable camera. Danny filmed some of it on the camcorder, me laughing at a bluegill I caught that was smaller than my hand. Normal stuff. I want you to know it wasn't all dread. Some of it was just a nice trip. That evening, while Danny grilled hot dogs on a little charcoal pit out back, I sat on the porch and looked through the guest book again, just to pass the time. I noticed something I'd missed that morning. Whoever kept that book had torn a few pages out, close to the binding, careful about it, but not careful enough to hide the ragged little strips still caught in the stitching. 3 pages gone in a row, somewhere around 1995. I mentioned it to Danny and he said maybe somebody spilled something and Carol Ann threw the pages out. It made sense. I told myself it made sense. It was the second night things started stacking up. We'd gone to bed around 11. I woke up sometime after midnight because I heard something moving inside the wall behind the headboard. Not scratching like an animal, more like a soft sliding sound, wood against wood, slow and careful, like someone easing a drawer open 1 inch at a time. I woke Danny up and we both lay there listening. It happened twice more and then stopped. In the morning, Danny went out to look at the outside of the house, at the wall behind our bedroom. He came back in looking a little strange and said there was a 2nd-story window up there that didn't match up with any room we'd been in. He'd counted the windows from outside and counted the rooms from inside, and the numbers didn't line up. 1 window too many. We asked Carol Ann about it when she came by that afternoon to drop off extra towels, which I thought was a strange thing for a landlady to personally do out in the country like that, but she said she liked checking on the place. She was a small woman with reading glasses on a chain and a cardigan even in July heat. When Danny mentioned the window, she got quiet for a second, then said that was the old hayloft above what used to be a feed room next to our bedroom, back when the upstairs was part of the working barn before they built the house around it. She said it was just storage now. She said it a little too fast. I asked her about the guest book entry. Ask her about the loft door. Don't let it go. She took her glasses off and cleaned them on her cardigan for a long time before she answered. She said some renters get funny ideas about old houses. She said the loft door was nailed shut years ago and there wasn't anything up there but her late husband's tools. Then she said she had to get back to town before the store closed, and she left faster than she'd arrived. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at that mismatched piece of crown molding above our headboard. Around 1 in the morning, I got the flashlight from Danny's tackle box and stood up on the bed to look at it close. There was a seam running along the bottom edge of that short section of trim, thin as a pencil line, that the rest of the molding didn't have. And down low, almost hidden in the seam, there was a gap about the width of 2 fingers, dark on the other side like it opened into empty space instead of solid wall. I didn't touch it that night. I got Danny up and we moved the mattress into the guest room down the hall and slept there instead, both of us feeling foolish and both of us not caring. The next day, we drove into the little town of Willow Fork for breakfast, mostly to get away from the house for a while. The diner waitress, a heavyset woman named Pat, asked where we were staying, and when we told her the old Beecher place, her smile sort of froze for a second before she said that was a nice property and changed the subject to the weather. When Danny went to pay at the register, the man working the counter, who I later found out ran the hardware store next door, leaned over and asked, real quiet, if we'd had any trouble sleeping out there. He said his cousin stayed there back in '94 and swore something used to move around above their bedroom at night, but the sheriff looked into it back then and never found anything, so folks just stopped talking about it. Danny asked him straight out if he knew anything about a loft door. The man's face changed just a little, and he said he sold Carol Ann's husband a gallon of white paint about 2 years back, matched to a chip he brought in from the house himself. And it always struck him odd that a widow who'd moved into town would drive all the way out just to touch up one little strip of trim in an upstairs bedroom nobody was using. He said he never thought much of it until we asked. That detail sat with me the whole drive back. The paint on that short section of crown molding above our headboard was newer than the rest. Somebody had opened that seam recently enough to need a fresh coat when they closed it back up. We should have left that day. I think about that a lot, but it was paid for through the weekend, and Danny wanted to see it through, and honestly, some stubborn part of me did too. That afternoon, while Danny napped in the guest room, I went out to the barn on my own. The loft door Carol Ann mentioned was on the outside wall of the barn, high up, reached by an old wooden ladder nailed to the siding. It wasn't nailed shut like she'd said. The nails were there, but they'd been pulled loose and pushed back into the same hole so it would look shut from a distance. I climbed up anyway. I want to say I was brave, but really I think I was just angry. Inside, the loft ran the length of the barn roof, low and dim, lit by one small window at the far end. The floor was swept clean, which surprised me because everything else about that barn was thick with dust. In the corner nearest the house, there was an old wooden crate turned on its side, like a stool, facing a section of wall that I realized, once I looked at it right, backed straight up against the top of our bedroom. Sticking out low on that wall, at exactly the height of someone sitting on that crate, was a short length of pipe, maybe 2 inches wide, running through the wall and disappearing into the house. Carol Ann's husband, the guest book later told me through old maintenance receipts I found stuffed behind a shelf, had once used the loft to run a feed chute down into a livestock pen that used to sit where our bedroom now stood, back before the renovation. The chute had been shortened and capped off when they built the house around it, except it wasn't capped. It had been bored back open and fitted with a short section of pipe, sanded smooth on both ends so it wouldn't catch fingers going through. Next to the crate sat a spiral notebook swollen with damp, the cover long gone. I only had time to read the top of one page before I heard the barn door creak open below me. Names, dates going back years, short notes after each one, things like slept well and argued about money and left early. Our names weren't on the page I saw, but there was a blank line at the bottom, like it was waiting to be filled in. I never went back up to check whose footsteps those were on the barn floor below. I got out through the small window at the far end instead, dropped onto the porch roof of the smokehouse, and ran back to the house. Danny and I left that night, 2 days early, without calling Carol Ann. We didn't tell her why. We mailed a note instead and never heard back. I called the Willow Fork Sheriff's Office a few months later, from a payphone outside a gas station 2 states away, because I still couldn't shake it. The deputy who answered said they'd have to look into whether that was still an open matter and somebody would call me back. Nobody ever did. I still don't know how many names were in that notebook before ours. I don't know if Carol Ann knew what was up in that loft or if somebody else had been using it without her. What I do know is that hardware store owner said his cousin stayed there in '94, and the guest book entry was from '96, and we were there in '98. Whoever kept that notebook filled had been keeping it a long time. Last year, driving through Missouri for a funeral, Danny looked up the old Beecher property out of curiosity. The listing had sold twice since we stayed there. The current owners had it up as a bed and breakfast, new photos, fresh paint. In one of the pictures taken from the yard, you can just see the corner of the barn behind the house. The loft window is boarded up now. I don't know if that means somebody finally found what we found, or if it just means somebody built a new way in.